The Joe Rogan Experience.
All right, Nick, this is one of the things that scares people more than anything is the idea that we're creating something or someone's going to create something that's going to be smarter than us. It's going to replace us. Is that something we should really be concerned about?
I presume you're referring to babies.
I'm referring to artificial intelligence.
Yes. Well, it's the big fear and the big hope, I think.
Both?
At the same time, yeah.
How is it the big hope?
Well, there are a lot of things wrong with the world as it is now.
Pull this up to your face if you would.
All the problems we have, most of them could be solved if we were smarter or if we had somebody on our side who were a lot smarter with better technology and so forth. Also, I think if we want to imagine some really grand future where humanity or our descendants one day go out and colonize the universe, I think that's likely to happen, if it's going to happen at all, after we have superintelligence that then develops the technology to make that possible.
The real question is whether or not we would be able to harness this intelligence or whether it would dominate.
Yeah, that certainly is one question. Not the only. You could imagine that we harness it, but then use it for bad purposes, as we have a lot of other technologies through history.
Yeah.
So I think there are really two challenges we need to meet. One is to make sure we can align it with human values, and then make sure that we together do something better with it than fighting wars or oppressing one another.
I think, well, what I'm worried about more than anything is that human beings are going to become obsolete, that we're going to invent something that's the next stage of evolution. I'm really concerned with that. I'm really concerned with if we look back on ancient hominids, Australopithecus, just think of some primitive ancestor of man. We don't want to go back to that. Like that's a terrible way to live. I'm worried that what we're creating is the next thing.
I think we don't necessarily want, or at least I wouldn't be totally thrilled with a future where humanity as it is now was the last and final word, the ultimate version beyond.
Right.
I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
Sure.
But not anything that is different is an improvement.
Right.
So the key would be, I think, to find some path forward where the best in us can continue to exist and develop to even greater levels. And maybe at the end of that path, it looks nothing like we do now. Maybe it's not two-legged, two-armed creatures running around with 3 pounds of thinking matter, right? It might be something quite different. But as long as what we value is present there, and ideally in a much higher degree than in the current world, then that could count as a success.
Yeah, the idea that we're in a state of evolution, that we are, just like we look at ancient hominids, that we are eventually going to become something more advanced or at least more complicated than we are now. But what I'm worried is that biological life itself has so many limitations. When we look at the evolution of technology, if you look at Moore's Law, or if you just look at new cell phones, like they just released a new iPhone yesterday, and they talked about all these incremental increases in the ability to take photographs and wide-angle lenses and night mode and a new chip that works even faster. These things, there's not the word evolution is incorrect, but the innovation of technology is so much more rapid than anything we could ever even imagine biologically. Like if we had a thing that we had created, if we had created, instead of artificial intelligence in terms of like something in a chip or a computer, if we created a life form, a biological life form, but this biological life form was improving radically every year, like it didn't even exist. Like the iPhone existed in 2007. That's when it was invented. If we had something that was 12 years old, but all of a sudden was infinitely faster and better and smarter and wiser than it was 12 years ago, the newest version of it, version X1, we would start going, whoa, hit the brakes on this thing, man. How many more generations before this thing's way smarter than us? How many more generations before this thing thinks that human beings are obsolete?
Yeah, it's coming at us fast, it feels
yes.
like. I mean, but some people think, it's slowing down now.
Who thinks it's slowing down?
Well, don't they have like Tyler Cowen and even Peter Thiel sometimes goes on about the pace of innovation not really being what it needs to be. I mean, maybe it was faster in like 1890s, but still, compared to almost all of human history, it seems like a period of unprecedented rapid progress right now.
Unprecedented.
I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, except for maybe a couple of decades, 100 years ago, when there was a lot of, electricity, the whole thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't think it's a concern because it's more of a curiosity to me. I mean, I am concerned, but the more I look at it and go, well, it seems inevitable that we're going to run into artificial intelligence. But the questions are so open-ended. We really don't know when. We really don't know what form it's going to take, and we really don't know what it's going to do to us.
Yeah, so I see it as not something that should be avoided, neither something that we should just be completely gung-ho about, but more like a kind of gate through which we will have to pass at some point. All paths that are both plausible and lead to really great futures, I think at some point involve the development of greater than human intelligence, machine intelligence. And so that our focus should be on getting our act together as much as we can in whatever period of time we have before that occurs.
Prepare ourselves.
Well, I mean, that might involve doing some research into various technical questions as how you build these systems so that we actually understand what they are doing and they have some, intended impact on the world. It might also, if we are able to get our act together a little bit on the kind of global political scene, a little bit more peace and love in the world would be good, I think.
Sure, that'd be nice.
And then like refraining from destroying ourselves through some other mean before we even get a chance to try to needle our way through this gate.
Well, that's certainly possible. We're certainly capable of screwing it all up. Where is the current state of technology now in regards to artificial intelligence, and how far away do you think we are from AGI?
Well, different people have different views on that. I think the truth of the matter is that it's very hard to have accurate views about the timelines for these things that's are still involve kind of big new breakthroughs that have to happen. Certainly, I mean, over the last 8 or 10 years, there has been a lot of excitement with the deep learning revolution. Things that, I mean, it used to be that people thought of AI as this kind of autistic savant, really good at logic and counting and memorizing facts, but with no intuition. And this deep learning revolution, when you began to do these deep neural networks, you kind of solved perception in some sense. You can have computers that can see, that can hear, and that have visual intuition. So that has enabled a whole wide suite of applications, which makes it commercially valuable, which then drives a lot of investment in it. Which, there's now quite a lot of momentum in machine learning and trying to kind of stay ahead of that.
It's interesting that when we think about artificial intelligence and whatever potential form that it's going to take, if you look at films like 2001, like HAL, like open the door, HAL, we think of something that's communicating to us like a person would, and maybe is a little bit colder and doesn't share our values and has a more pragmatic view of life and death and things. When we think of intelligence, though, I think intelligence in our mind is almost inexorably connected to all the things that make us human, like emotions and ambition and all these things, like the reason why we innovate. It's not really clear. Like, why we innovate because we enjoy innovation and because we want to make the world a better place and because we want to fix some problems that we've created and we want to solve some limitations of the human body and the environment that we live in. But we sort of assume that intelligence that we create will also have some motivations.
Well, there is a fairly large class of possible structures you could do. If you want to do anything that has any kind of cognitive or intellectual capacity at all, a large class of those would be what we might call agents. So these would be systems that interact with the world in pursuit of some goal. And if there are a sophisticated class of agents, they can plan ahead a sequence of actions. Like more primitive agents might just have reflexes. But the sophisticated agent might have a model of the world where it can kind of think ahead before it starts doing stuff. It can kind of think, what would I need to do in order to reach this desired state, and then reason backwards from that. So I think it's a fairly natural, it's not the only possible cognitive system you could build, but it's also not this weird, bizarre, special case that, it's a fairly natural thing to aim for. If you're able to specify the goal, something you want to achieve, but you don't know how to achieve it, a natural way of trying to go about that is by building this system that has this goal and is an agent and then moves around and tries different things and eventually perhaps learns to solve that task.
Do you anticipate different types of artificial intelligence, like artificial intelligence that mimics the human emotions? Like, do you think that people will construct something that's very similar to us in a way that we can interact with it in common terms, or do you think it will be almost like communicating with an alien?
So there are different scenarios here. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd guess, my guess is that the first thing that actually achieves superintelligence would not be very human-like. There are different possible ways you could try to get to this level of technology. One would be by trying to reverse engineer the human brain. Like we have an existence in the limiting case. Imagine if you just made an exact duplicate in silicon of the human brain, like every neuron had some counterpart. So that seems technologically very difficult to do, but it wouldn't require a big theoretical breakthrough to do it. You could just if you had sufficiently good microscopy and large enough computers and enough elbow grease, you could but it seems to me plausible that what will work before we are able to do it that way will be some more synthetic approach where there would only be a very rough resemblance, maybe with the neocortex.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions, right? Whether or not we can replicate all the functions of the human brain in the way it functions, in like mimic it exactly, or whether we could have some sort of superior method that achieves the same results that the human brain does in terms of its ability to calculate and reason and do multiple tasks at the same time.
Yeah, and I also think that maybe once you have a sufficiently high level of this general form of intelligence, then you could use that maybe to emulate or mimic things that we do differently. So maybe our cortex is quite limited, so we rely a lot on earlier neurological structures that we have. We have to be guided by emotion because we can't just calculate everything out. And instinct and if we lost all of that, we would be helpless. But maybe some system that had a sufficiently high level of this more abstract reasoning capability could maybe use that to substitute for things that weren't built in the same way that we do.
Have you ever talked to Sam Harris about this?
Yeah, a little bit.
Have you ever had a podcast with him?
Actually, he had him on his podcast half a year ago.
I'll have to listen to it because he has the worst view of the future in terms of artificial intelligence. He's terrified of it, and when I talk to him, he terrifies me. And Elon Musk is right up there. He also has a terrifying view of what artificial intelligence could potentially be. What do you say to those guys?
Well, I mean, I do think that there are these significant risks that will be associated with this transition to the machine intelligence era, including existential risk, threats to the very survival of humanity or what we care about.
So why are we doing this?
There are a lot of things we're doing that maybe globally it would be better if we didn't do. I mean, just why do we build thousands of nuclear weapons?
Right. Why do we overfish the oceans?
Yeah. So now, I mean, if one actually asks why do different individuals work on AI research or why do different companies and governments fund it, I mean, there are a lot of explanations. It's like a great scientific endeavor. If you can make the Google search engine 1% better, that's got to be worth like $1 billion right off the bat. It's become a kind of prestige thing now where nations want to have some sort of strategy because it's seen as this new frontier. Just like when you had steam engines and industrialization a few hundred years ago and electricity, like it's going to just open up a lot of economic opportunities. You want to be in there where it's happening. You want to be this kind of, we are going to do subsistence agriculture while the rest of the world is moving on.
Right.
So there's a lot of, it's kind of overdetermined. Like you could remove some of these reasons and there would still be enough reasons for why people would be pushing forward with this.
One of the things that scares me the most is the idea that if we do create artificial intelligence, then it will improve upon our design and create far more sophisticated versions of itself. And that it will continue to do that until it's unrecognizable, until it reaches literally a godlike potential.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the real numbers were. Maybe you could tell us. But someone had calculated, some reputable source had calculated the amount of improvement that sentient artificial intelligence would be able to create inside of a small window of time. Like if it was allowed to innovate and then make better versions of itself, and those better versions of itself were allowed to innovate and make better versions of itself, you're talking about not an exponential increase of intelligence, but an explosion.
Well, we don't know. So it's hard enough to forecast the pace at which we will make advances in AI, because we just don't know how hard the problems are that we haven't yet solved.
Right.
And once you get to human level or a little bit above, I mean, who knows? It could be that there is some level where to get further, you would need to put in a lot of thinking time to kind of get there. Now, what is easier to estimate is if you just look at the speed, because that's just a function of the hardware that you're running it on, right? So there we know that there is a lot of room in principle. If you look at the physics of computation and you look at what would an optimally arranged physical system be that was optimized for computation, that would be way many orders above what we can do now. And then you could have arbitrarily large systems like that. So from that point of view, we know that there could be things that would be 1 million times faster than the human brain and with a lot more memory and stuff like that.
And then something, if it did have 1 million times more power than the human brain, it could create something with 1 million times more computational power than itself. It could make better versions. It could continue to innovate. Like if we create something that we say, it is sentient, it is artificial intelligence. Now, please go innovate. Please go follow the same directive and improve upon your design.
Yeah, well, but we don't know how long that would take then to get to. So we already have sort of millions of times more thinking capacity than a human has. We have millions of humans.
Right.
So if you kind of break it down, you think there's one milestone when you have maybe an AI that could do what one human can do. But then that might still be quite a lot of orders of magnitude, until it would be equivalent of the whole human species. And maybe during that time, other things happen. Maybe we upgrade, our own abilities in some way. So there are some scenarios where it's so hard to get even to one human baseline that we kind of use this massive amount of resources just to barely create kind of, a village idiot.
Yes.
Using billions of dollars of compute, right? So if that's the way we get there, then, it might take quite a while, because you can't easily scale something that you've already spent billions of dollars building. Yeah,
some people think the whole thing is blown out of proportion, that we're so far away from creating artificial general intelligence that resembles human beings that it's all just vaporware. Mm-hmm. What do you say to those people?
One would be that I would want to be more precise about just how far away does it have to be in order for us to be rational to ignore it. It might be that if something is sufficiently important and high stakes, then even if it's not going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, it might still be wise for our pool of 7 billion plus people to have some people actually thinking about this ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure.
So some of these disagreements, I guess this is my point, are more apparent than real. Some people say it's going to happen soon, and some other people say, no, it's not going to happen for a long time. And then, one person means by soon 5 years, and another person means by a long time 5 years. And, it's more of different attitudes rather than different specific beliefs. So I would first want to make sure that there actually is a disagreement.
Mm.
Now, if there is, if somebody is very confident that it's not going to happen in hundreds and hundreds of years, then I guess I would want to know their reasons for that level of confidence. What's the evidence they're looking at? Do they have some ground for being very sure about this? Certainly, the history of technology prediction is not that great. You can find a lot of other examples where even very eminent technologists and scientists were cocksure it's not going to happen in our lifetime. And
yes.
in some cases, it had actually already just happened in some other part of the world. or it happened like a year or two later. So I think some epistemic humility with these things would be wise.